And our next presenter is Salim Mansur. He's a professor of political science at the University of Western Ontario. And Salim, you have 10 minutes to make your presentation, and then you will have time for questions. Not you will have time for questions. The committee will have time to ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And honorable members, many thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts with this standing committee on citizenship and immigration. I appear before you as a common citizen, deeply apprehensive and concerned about the drift of our country as it changes due to the rate of immigration that is without precedent among any of the advanced liberal democracies of the West. My expertise, or to the extent my expertise is recognized by this committee for which I have been invited to appear before you, is that of a professional academic, a researcher, writer, author, and public intellectual of some recognition in this great country of ours, and I'm proud and humbled to come before you as an unhyphenated Canadian. Let me state right at the outset, before I share with you my perspective on immigration, I support all measures under consideration that modern technology provides for securing our borders, monitoring those who seek to gain entry into Canada, those who arrive here without proper documentation and claim refugee status, and those in legions outside of Canada who want to come here as immigrants. I believe it is a no-brainer to work towards a more secure Canada and to implement smart cards, biometric systems, and other tools available now or will be in the future. I have no doubt on this matter that were we to have the thoughts of our founding fathers inform us, and those remarkable leaders who have come after them, such as Laurier and King, Pearson and Trudeau, Knowles and Douglas, they would remind us that a constitution agreed upon by a free people to provide for, as John A. Macdonald put it, peace, order, and good government, is not a suicide pact. In the small amount of time I have before you, I want to stress upon the first principle behind the immigration policy as it has evolved since the centennial year and presently stand. Needless to remark that Canada is an immigrant country, and our history tells us that we should know it has been immigrants from Europe over the past several centuries that have built this country. On the whole, they built it well, and indeed so well that Canada has come to be an eagerly sought country for people from around the world, as I did. But, and here is the point, at some stage of Canada's historical development since at least 1867, those who built Canada in the early years of its history could have reached an agreement to close the door to immigration. They did not. They believed the strength of the country would be maintained through a judicious policy of accepting new immigrants from Europe. The key point here I want to emphasize, and I have written about this at length in the public media, is they all believe that immigration judiciously and carefully managed, I emphasize managed, in terms of numbers and source of origin of immigrants should be such that the nature of Canada as a liberal democracy is not undermined. It is numbers, and the nature of numbers that matter, and given the nature of things, determines how existing arrangements are secured or undermined. Since the open-door immigration policy was instituted around the time of Canada's centennial year, the nature of immigration into Canada started to change from what had been the pattern since before 1867 to around 1960. During the past 50 years, immigration from outside of Europe, from what is generally designated the Third World, has rapidly increased in proportion to those immigrants originating in Europe. Furthermore, given the revolution in transportation with the introduction of wide-body transcontinental jetliner that has made mass travel economical and easy, the distinction between immigrant and migrant workers has been eliminated. This means, and it is not simply in reference to ethnicity, that Canada is rapidly changing culturally in ways a political elite, media elite, and academic elite do not want to discuss. But the fact that this is not discussed or driven under the carpet does not mean the public is not keenly aware of how much the country has changed in great measure in a relatively short period, and if this pattern continues for another few decades, there is the likelihood that Canada will have changed irrevocably and not necessarily for the better in terms of its political tradition as a liberal democracy. So, in terms of first principle, we need a governing institution, and those individuals we as Canadians send to represent us to boldly re-examine our existing immigration policy and rethink it in terms of what it represents and how it will affect the well-being of Canada in the years to come. I do not need to remind you that any set of policy, however benign or good the intent is behind the making of such policy, is riddled with unintended consequences. History is a paradox. What you intend is not how things turn out in the long run, and not even in the short term. Pick any example you want and think it through and see for yourself the paradoxical nature of history and how it surprises us by confounding our expectations. I have at hand the recent publication of Statistics Canada, Projection of the Diversity of the Canadian Population, 2006 to 2031. In other words, this projection affects me and what remains of my life, but more importantly affects my children, my students, my friends and neighbors. Your views as our representatives are critical and will affect all of us. And you will be responsible in terms of history if you take your place in these hallowed halls with the seriousness it demands for the good and the bad that come out of your decisions. Let me quickly, time permitting, point from this Statistics Canada publication the following. 1. Given the nature of our immigration policy, since 1960, the foreign-born population is growing about 4 times faster than the rest of the population. Consequently, in 2031, there will be between 9.8 million and 12.5 million foreign-born persons compared to 6.5 million in 2006, and the corresponding number in 1981 was 3.8 million. According to Statistics Canada projection, the population estimated for 2031 will be around 45 million, with 32%, around 14.5 million people will be foreign-born. 3. One more interesting and yet critical figure is the cultural religious makeup of Canada in 2031. The fastest growth, according to the report, is the Muslim population, quote-unquote, with its numbers tripling during this period. This increase is mainly due to 2 factors, the composition of immigration and higher fertility than for other groups. The figures are for Muslims in 2006 at around 900,000, constituting 2.7% of the population, and rising to 2031 around 3.3 million, constituting 7.3% of the population. If the levels of immigration in Canada is being maintained and defended on the basis of the need to deal with the problems of Canadian society in terms of aging population, fertility rates among Canadian women, skilled labour management requirement, and maintaining a growth level for the population consistent with the growth of the economy, then this policy needs to be reevaluated. We cannot fix the social problems of the Canadian society by an open immigration policy that adds to the numbers at a rate that puts into question the absorptive capacity of the country not only in economic terms but also, if not more importantly, in cultural and social terms, and what this does to our political arrangement as a liberal democracy. The flow of immigration into Canada from around the world, and in particular the flow from Muslim countries, means a pouring in of numbers into a liberal society of people from cultures at best non-liberal. But we know through our studies and observation that the illiberal mix of cultures poses one of the greatest dilemmas and an unprecedented challenge to liberal societies such as ours, when there is no demand placed on immigrants any longer to assimilate into the founding liberal values of the country to which they have immigrated to, and instead, by a misguided and thoroughly wrong-headed policy of multiculturalism, encourage the opposite. It is no wonder that recently the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the British Prime Minister David Cameron, among other European leaders, and a growing body of intellectuals have spoken out in public against multiculturalism and the need to push it back, even repeal it. I have written a book on the wrong-headed policy of multiculturalism and published recently under the title Delectable Lie, a Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism. Time forbids me to discuss this matter in any length, but I would like to leave the following paradox with you. We may want to continue with the level of immigration into Canada annually that is about the same as it is at present. We cannot, however, continue with such an inflow of immigrants under the present arrangement of the official policy of multiculturalism based on the premise all cultures are equal, when this is untrue, and that this policy is a severe, perhaps even a lethal test for liberal democracy such as ours. This means we cannot simultaneously continue with both the existing level of immigration and official multiculturalism, and must choose one or the other for the preservation of our liberal democratic traditions. If we persist, we will severely undermine a liberal democracy or what remains of it, compromise the foundation of individual freedom by accommodating group rights, and bequeath to our children and unborn generation a political situation fraught with explosive potential for ethnic violence, the sort of which we have seen in Europe, in the riots in the banlieues or suburbs of Paris and other metropolitan centers. In conclusion, I want to emphasize we need to consider lowering the number of immigrants entering into Canada until we've had a serious debate among Canadians on this matter. We should not allow bureaucratic inertia determining not only the policy but the existing level of immigrant numbers and source within origin that Canada brings in annually. We have the precedent of how we selectively closed immigration from the Soviet bloc countries during the Cold War years, and we need to consider doing the same in terms of immigration from Muslim countries for a period of time, given how disruptive the cultural baggage of illiberal values is brought in as a result. We are, in other words, stoking the fuel of much unrest in our country, as we have witnessed of late in Europe. And lest any member wants to instruct me that my views are in any way politically incorrect or worse, I would like members to know that I come before you as a practicing Muslim who know out of experience from the inside how volatile, how disruptive, how violent, how misogynistic is the culture of Islam today and has been during my lifetime, and how it greatly threatens our liberal democracy that I cherish, since I know what is its opposite. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And we are going to go to... Are we going to you?
Yeah, I'm sitting. Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I will share my time with my colleague Rick Dykstra. I'll let Rick ask the first question.
I thought that's what I heard. So we will start with Mr. Dykstra and then go over to Mr. Lam.
Mr. Mansour, we had a bit of an issue in our last committee meeting where there was discussion around an individual's views pertaining to those who should or should not come to the country. And 3 times during your presentation you raised the issue of you think we should not be allowing any more Muslims to come to this country, number one. And number two, you've indicated that we should be lowering the number of those that we allow into the country. So I'm assuming that your basis of belief in the first part, which is to restrict individuals from coming to this country because of their belief or because of their upbringing or because of their culture or their lifestyle, that by lowering the number we would actually have the ability to do that?
Well, I believe the numbers that we have, and because of the limitation of time, I was not getting into numbers here, but I understand it's somewhere around about 300,000 if we take in the question of those who are coming in as legal immigrants that have gone through the process, including refugee claimants, including
it's about 250,000, but continue.
So that's the number. And what I'm suggesting, that is not only such unprecedented numbers, and that raises the whole problem of absorptive capacity, and the absorptive capacity has not only to do with economic situation, particularly in the time period that we're living since 2008, but in the larger question of what it means for our country to remain a liberal democracy. This is a question, I believe, through my study, that we have to confront as the Europeans are confronting today. We are only just a few years behind what is happening in Europe right now. That's the concern from which I'm speaking to you, sir.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, your view of a liberal democracy was represented by 6 liberal prime ministers. I'm assuming you didn't mean liberalism in that effect. You meant liberalism in terms of our rights and responsibilities and obligations as Canadians. Just one further then, I just would like you to clarify for me why you believe that from a Muslim faith perspective, that they're going to have or going to be a detriment to our liberal Canadian democracy here in Canada, or at least the structure upon which you frame the term liberal.
Well, it is, as I understand it, as a practicing Muslim and coming from a background that is the background of Islamic society.
Well, just because you're a practicing Muslim doesn't necessarily mean you can say who can and who can't come to this country.
No, I didn't say that, and that was not what you asked me. How do I think? So that's what I was raising to answer you.
Okay.
And that's the question. That is the cultural context from which the population is coming is a cultural context that is in many ways antithetical to the values that represents a liberal democracy such as ours or in Western Europe. So the overarching issue is that these numbers are challenging our own system of a culture. Liberal democracy is a culture. I don't think that too many of us talk about this. I'm here talking about this as a political philosopher and academic, sir. So I'm sharing with you my concern. We are a culture, a liberal democracy, and that culture is based upon certain very fundamental assumptions. And those assumptions are unique in history. And the critical core assumption is about individual freedom. Now, there are cultures, in fact, most of the cultures around the world are not liberal democratic.
Agreed. But you make one assumption, and that is the big core assumption that you make in your philosophical argument, at least from my perspective, is that you're assuming that our liberal democracy, what it is to be Canadian, cannot withstand the input from the Muslim community from around the world. I would argue that the reason we are so good as a country and why 1 billion out of 7 billion people want to come here is because and I guess this is where you and I fundamentally disagree, and that is that we actually have a core belief, a core understanding of what it is to be Canadian, and there are 1 billion people around this world that seek to entertain that same kind of lifestyle, that same kind of belief, that same kind of democracy, that same kind of charter and rights of freedoms that we enjoy here.
Have I the time to reply?
Yes, you do.
No. Well, you're speaking to one of them sitting right across from you, sir. So I don't know whether you know the other side from where the demand comes. I know it from the other side. And I know, and that's why I said in my conclusion, I know what the opposite is, and why I so greatly value what is Canada and what I greatly value liberal democracy.
That's the dichotomy for me, because you are saying that others don't have the ability to become the Canadians as we see it, but you have that ability to do so.
No, I say it because it is a question of where we have gone in the last 40 years. In 2011, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the official policy of multiculturalism. I've written a book about it, and I would invite you to read that book, sir.
I do share some of your views on multiculturalism. Yeah, we don't share the same view.
No, maybe not, but that's what liberal democracy is all about. That's why you invite me and to share that view. So
absolutely.
It is not about that you impose one value and I impose another value. That's precisely the debate is.
Your concern is, though, that the Muslim community is going to impose a value structure and system here that will overreach, overarch, and overtake ours.
Well, I would argue that we have to be ostriches not to realize what is happening around the world. And we have to be ostriches that we do not understand that the demands coming from the organized Muslim community is for values to be accepted in a liberal democracy that is thoroughly incompatible with liberal democracy. I'm referring here to the demands of the Sharia implementation. We came very close to having that implemented or opened up in Ontario. We're seeing that's what's happening in Europe. This is not simply an isolated thing. And as I pointed out to you, sir, we might disagree on the issue, but this phenomena is a global phenomena that we are discussing globally. We're not only discussing within Canada. We cannot say that Canada is an island by itself and unto itself and is unaffected by the global phenomenon.
Thank you, Salim. Less than half a minute. And I know my other colleague is anxious to
thank you, Chair. Salim, I want to focus a little bit back on the security of Canada's immigration system, and I understanding that if you look further ahead to the next generation, the multiculturalism side of it is how we social engineer our society. And, we've done that in the past, and since 1971 with multiculturalism, we are social engineering the future, essentially Canada. What I want to focus on more is the cultural sensitivities that this study is.
I hate to do this to you, Mr. Lang, but we're at 7:08, and so if you could make your question very succinct. And
my question is succinct. My surname can be pronounced and translated in about 8 different ways. Muslim surnames could be Muhammad. My question to you is, how do we blend that into our system so that we can have the security of our system so that we know that the person that is coming in can be uniquely identified such that if he's a terrorist or someone that has committed war crimes, we will know about it.
Could you please keep your answer very brief, as we have gone well over the time for this segment. Very brief.
Well, very briefly, sir, my answer would be that liberal democracy respects individual rights. Your problem of how the names are pronounced is a problem of part of learning process. But liberal democracy's core value is the defense of individual rights, respect for individual rights, and counter to liberal democracy is group and collective understanding and rights. And that's where the fundamental conflict is, sir.
Okay. We're now going to proceed over to my colleague, Mylene Freeman, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Mansour, I'm not quite understanding how you're linking a policy of multiculturalism and openness and inclusion to security threats. Could you possibly try and draw that causal link for me? Because I'm seeing multiculturalism and inclusion as part of what liberal democratic values are and part of what this country is about, not the opposite. I don't think that it's... I think rather the opposite. Policies of exclusion can breed intolerance. And could you please explain to me how you're making this link?
Well, I would very respectfully say the problem that you're raising is particularly the problem that has come about in the last 40 years of bending the rules of liberal democracy, which is very respectful and inclusive of individuals, into saying that, we're not going to say some things about others in the basis of their collective cultural values and rights. We have this problem right now in Quebec. I mean, if you're following what has happened there with their bill dealing with the question of hijab and niqab, this has been a huge problem in Europe. Now, is that a question of simply a cultural value, or there are security implications? We've had this debate here. I've appeared in the committee here talking about face uncovering for passport photographs and identities and so on and so forth. So that is part of the security issue if you're talking about it. I think our police forces and our security forces are daily running into problems. I've spoken to a lot of police officers. Some of them are my friends who deal with this problem on a daily basis. So yeah, there are cultural sensitivities here, and that is protected by the multicultural values. And so that's where the drift is and where the problem is, and which is where I'm putting my fingers on.
Well, you in an interview with Phyllis Chesler, Professor Phyllis Chesler, you say that when asked what you think Canada's immigration policy should be, you answer that it's a complicated subject, and quote, that my own view is there should be some sort of moratorium on immigration from the Muslim world, given the nature of politics and culture exported from there to the West. So what you're meaning is things that aren't compatible with liberal democracy, not actually Muslim culture. Given that you are yourself Muslim, I assume that it isn't. It seems here like you're saying all Muslims will not be compatible in liberal democratic value systems, which I'd like you to explain or elaborate if that's your view, because unfortunately I just don't see how that is. Honourable
member, I can explain to you by analogy if the time permits. The people who understood what the problems of communism were people from within the belly of communism. If I remind you of names like Natan Sharansky and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Václav Havel and others, this was a global struggle. And it was a struggle, which was in a sense a life and death struggle. And there were people inside the Soviet Union, as there are inside China, Liu Xiaobo and others, who understand what is at stake. So it is not that the whole Muslim world is completely driven underground. There's a huge struggle going on right now as I speak. But the problem and the challenge is that the organized mainstream Islam is incompatible with liberal democracy. And we as a society have decided not to question these things.
I think the member is
I would like to talk a little bit about, in this interview you do talk about the fact that, for instance, in the Shafia case, these girls didn't have access to resources. Isn't the problem really our giving access to these girls and making sure that they have safe spaces and places to get out of these situations like any other Canadian girl would, that are culturally appropriate, like that are Muslim women's centers or something like that, somewhere where they can go and feel comfortable, just like we do that for Aboriginal women and needs to be done for Aboriginal women and girls like myself who have generations back in Canada. I still have friends like me who come under abuse as women. So this is something that's more about resources and not actually about Muslims. So if you could maybe talk about some of the resources we need for addressing these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I'm a father of a beautiful young girl, and I hope she will grow up to be a very strong woman like yourself, madam, and will have a role to play in Canada. And I want her to be that. I want her to be a free and brave woman. But I wouldn't like to see what has happened to a woman who wanted to be brave, and like any other Canadian, who was strangulated, like Aksa Parve. She just wanted to be a Canadian woman. And every aspect of what is Canada was ignored to Aksa Parvez, as it was ignored to the girls, the Shafila family, and there are innumerable such things. And that is the fundamental contradiction that we have brought upon ourselves. We have contorted our society. That's the Europeans are now facing up to it. And some of us will have to face up to it. Maybe you members are reluctant to face up to it for all sorts of political consideration. And some of us have to speak out. So ironically, as a Muslim, I'm speaking out here, reminding you that this is a deep struggle that is going on. This is a 1400-year struggle. So when you tell me that this is not something to do about Islam or about Muslim, it's simply about the resources, well, that's a patchwork answer. Yes, we have symptoms, so it's like an illness. You have to deal with it aspirin or with other medication. So yes, the resource center. But that doesn't answer the fundamental problem that we are importing into our country. I only raise the issue of Islam, but there is all sorts of other issues.
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned the Bouchard-Taylor report a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
In it, do you know the difference between basically secularism and laicity that Charles Taylor will draw? So maybe give a quick explanation of that for the committee. I don't know how much time I have.
You have about 32 seconds to respond.
In that case, what I will go ahead and say is essentially that I think you're arguing for something that sounds a lot more like laicite to me, which is a lot more like what European countries have done that have led them to the situation of not being able to accept other communities. Whereas Canada has been struggling obviously struggling, but I think succeeding in a sense, to create a secularism where everybody is included. And that means that we do need to bring out tensions, and we do need to make sure that in the end, I agree, liberal democracy needs to be withheld. Women's rights need to be withheld, for instance, but that isn't something that I think is tied necessarily to shutting out communities or shutting them into themselves, but rather openness. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Freeman. And now I'm going to turn to Deputy Lamoureux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your comments. Don't necessarily have to agree with the comments, but I do appreciate the comments, and it does lead me to maybe a different line of questioning. And you're obviously very concerned about the multicultural policy. It's very apparent. One of the things that the government does do beyond immigration is provide settlement monies. And through the settlement money, there's a multitude of different types of programs that are provided. Do you think that if we were to look at settlement programming, and maybe this is something in which the government has not been overly successful at, is looking at settlement, how we're spending the settlement money, maybe to be able to deal with some of the concerns that you're highlighting here. If we look at the value of education, and the education of tolerance in society, for example, of how we could better ensure that people are being provided opportunities in an equal fashion. Do you think that we could be doing a better job in terms of settlement plans, which would make our communities a safer place to be?
So we can always do better job under any circumstance. That's not the issue that I'm concerned about. We were, until this policy of multiculturalism was introduced, a liberal democracy. We are still trying to be a liberal democracy, but we have created a situation And again, the Europeans are not confronting it. We have created a situation because the implicit premise of multiculturalism, that's the fundamental political philosophical issues we are dealing with. The fundamental premise of multiculturalism is collective identity because it says all cultures are equal, which is a flatly untrue statement. All cultures are not equal. You cannot equate a liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is not a color issue, by the way. And I think that's where people get confused. Liberal democracy is a fundamental issue of premise that says about individual rights. And historically, a liberal democratic system has best dealt with all the various contradictions in bringing about a good society. So we can do and deal with all of the problems that arises by eliminating this argument that we have imported into our own makeup as a society that all cultures are equal. That leads to all sorts of consequences. Time forbids me, but that's why I said history is a paradox. And you take and consider any situation, it is the unintended consequences that flow. So I would remind you, and I've written about this extensively, that our Prime Minister, late Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, right in these hallowed halls, in his last visit, expressed regrets. When he was asked a direct question, what do you think as a father of official multiculturalism? What is your thoughts about multiculturalism that you introduced? So these are footnotes that you can go in through it. The paradoxical result has been we have been stripping away the fundamental rights that exist in a liberal democracy, and no right is more fundamental than the right of free speech. And we have contorted and created all sorts of problems. And we're going to make it even more as the numbers grows, because that's our political institution under this system will try to adapt to those numbers, will try to accommodate those numbers, will then give in to those numbers. That's the nature of politics. It is nothing new that we are inventing, especially a democratic politics. It's all about numbers. That's what I said. And so the numbers are going to lead to a certain way things are going to evolve. And we are already seeing the signs of that evolution taking place. The problem with the Islamic world has been the global challenge that has come into it at the beginning of the 21st century with 9/11. And it's not going to phase out so quickly because it's a historical challenge, just as the challenge with communism was all of the 20th century. So when you raise a question about expenditure and maintenance and health care and so on and so forth, we will need those resources. We will need those monies. We will need to keep an economy growing. I'm coming back to the fundamental nature of our society. And there is that paradoxical relationship between where we are in terms of a multicultural society and a free country, an open country with the levels of immigration, the numbers. And the two things will reach within a matter of a generation to a circumstances which I'm inviting you, because we send you to represent us, that we are looking down a road. This is not a matter of hypothetical, this is a matter of clearly being able to forecast where we are headed. And we are headed into dangerous grounds. Yeah. Europe is already showing us where we are headed.
Just to, I guess maybe just to pick up on one quick point.
Sorry, Deputy Lamoureux, your time is up. Thank you. We're now going to go to Deputy Opitz.
So in terms of multiculturalism, I would also point out that Senator Paul Yuzik and Prime Minister Diefenbaker had a great deal to do with it at the time. But and this is a great discourse, but I think we need to re-vector on what the real discussion is here today, and it's security. Canadian security in our immigration system. And I'd like to talk to you about, we have talked about earlier on incidents where somebody has arrived in this country multiple times, deported multiple times, come back, perform criminal acts and so forth. And that's a hole in our security, clearly. And some of the biometric data that we'd like to put in place, including information sharing with our allies that will assist us in being able to identify those people that are undesirable in Canada or are actually coming here potentially to do harm to this country or for under fraudulent means. So I would like, and there are biometrics now. I mean, here's my Nexus card. This is I love this thing because you get in and out of the airport very, very quickly. You're identified. It's there. The retina scan, fingerprint scan, my photograph, which is really unflattering, but it's very useful. So I would like your thoughts on the security apparatus, the things that we need to put in place, as Mr. Menegakis earlier referred to as an entrance and exit strategy, so we know people coming in and out of Canada. So can you comment on those things, sir?
My comment is very briefly. We need the technological input that we can get and put them in place. The dilemma is, as the previous witnesses pointed out, the question about our legal obligation, our constitutional obligation to the individuals on the one side of the equation, and the other side of the equation is exactly as you have mentioned, the concern about our security, people who want to do us harm. That's quite evident. And how do we go about it? How do we balance those things? I would weigh in on the security side, given the nature of the world that we are living in and the nature of the threats that exist.
Yeah, agreed, and I think that we need to be able to identify people categorically through photographs, the tombstone data, as they say, which is very, very useful. And in terms of information sharing, what is your view on terms of the databases that are shared? Should they be 100% solution, or because I don't think there is. I mean, data is only as accurate as the inputs and is subject to correction, no matter where you are. What's your view on sharing data between allies, sir?
Well, it depends upon who you're sharing with. I mean, I think if you're going to be sharing with other democracies, we need to share with other democracies, and we will trust that and demand that they keep those data secure. But if you're sharing it with non-democracies, and much of the threats that we are talking about, which is below the surface, we don't want to, put them in words, are from areas which are non-democratic societies, and the problem will persist. How do we share those data with these non-democratic societies, knowing fully well that these are societies that have no respect for their own people? We're watching this on a daily basis, what is happening. So those are concerns. We as a democracy, we take our responsibility seriously, and we can only go so far as about our responsibility is, but the other side, it will be simply a matter of prudence and pragmatics.
Okay. I don't have much time left. So do I?
20 seconds.
Great. Now, would biometrics technology be enough here, or would other methods? So, for example, Israel, they use pre-screening methods to identify everybody that's boarding a plane before they depart or enter Israel via an Israeli airline. Is there something we can do? Should we implement similar procedures?
Well, the quick answer is this is the paradox. We put in a high technological instrument in place, and we assume that will solve a problem. The ultimate is the human intelligence. So the Israeli issue is also they have the most modern technology to the extent that I have traveled in Israel, but the human intelligence is also immensely good, and ultimately it's the human intelligence side that becomes in some ways a critical issue.
Just for can you define human intelligence?
Well, the sources that we deal with, security, people that can come and talk to you. Here I am, sharing with you information, the information that we can provide. Our state and its people can reach out and keep tab upon the information that comes to. I think and the confidence that the people feel to come out and share the information. I don't have to tell you, sir, about, for instance, the way the Toronto 18 was cracked. And so many others have been cracked that we do not know about it because, again, the dog never barked. Mm-hmm. But the reason that the dog never barked because it was the human intelligence that prevented the dog from barking.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
My apologies. You actually have 2 more minutes.
I do?
Yeah.
Oh.
Gift.
Rick, good to go?
Yeah, I actually, that's an interesting observation. Our previous 2 witnesses, one in particular sitting in your chair, argued about the fact that by keeping all of the records that we do, we can't really prove whether we've actually kept somebody bad out. And I think you're actually presenting the other side of that argument, which is, it's very hard to judge who we may have kept out, because the last thing CSIS or for that matter in terms of a North American agreement with the United States, the acknowledgments publicly of those who we kept out are not necessarily those that we should make public. Right. And I think you're making a pretty strong argument that we do need, with respect to security, a certain semblance of order and specifics around what that intelligence collection is all about. So I guess just maybe giving you an opportunity to pursue that a little bit further in terms of acknowledging that, look, we need a system in place that is going to have its checks and balances in order to keep our country safe.
Yeah, I agree, sir. My time is up.
Oh, no, you got 30 seconds.
Yes. Well, just keep it brief.
Well, I agree. I mean, we need to have the checks and balances in place. The human intelligence is extremely important, and we are all of us know that the demand side is far greater than the resource side available. So how do we cut the resources for all the demands that is out there?
Right.
Thank you very much. I'm now going over to Deputy Sitsa Bison.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mr. Mansour, thank you for coming today. I, for one, believe that Canada's multiculturalism is something that Canada and Canadians take pride in. I represent one of Canada's most diverse ridings. It's something which constituents have told me time and again how much they value our multicultural heritage. Over 90% of my constituents are actually considered new immigrants or immigrant populations. Canada's multiculturalism supports feelings of pride, respect, and connection to one's culture and heritage, which, of course, furthers newer immigrants' sense of pride in their new home, Canada. Myself, I'm a Canadian of Tamil heritage. Like you said yourself, I am not a hyphenated Canadian. I'm a Canadian, but I also value my heritage and feel that it adds a lot to myself, my identity, and what I will be leaving for my children, my grandchildren, and my community. I know that I've been able to make a little bit of a contribution and will continue to make much more because of that heritage that I understand and know and I'm proud of. Multiculturalism, it protects one's ability to act in accordance with one's cultural beliefs or practices, but of course within the limits of the law. We know some of the examples that my colleague mentioned earlier, that oppression exists within all cultures and countries. Racism, sexism, this is why we have laws to protect people in our country. With the history of discriminatory policies, like, of course, the residential schools or the Chinese head tax, exclusionary policies, I don't believe that, this is something that we should be doing. This is probably not the direction that we want to be heading in the future with further exclusionary policies or discriminatory policies with our immigration policies like the Chinese head tax. My question for you is relating to what many auditors general have mentioned. One after the other have stated that there are serious flaws with how our current immigration laws are administered. Officers have no idea who should be coming to Canada, as they do not have specific nor enough information to make an assessment on the admissibility of applicants. Additionally, there is a lack of performance reviews, guidance, and training that's provided to officers who are making these decisions. Do you have any comments on the Auditor General's recommendations?
No, I don't have any comments. I mean, your preliminary remarks I share with you, but we have different conclusions in terms of your preliminary remarks. You come from Sri Lanka, I was born in India. If there's any country that is more multicultural, if you want to talk about it, it is India, with 1 billion people and its diversity, but we talk about it. So the point, I said the preliminary remarks. Mm-hmm. On the secondary part, it's an ongoing problem. It's an ongoing problem of our bureaucracy. It's an ongoing problem of our institution, because we are a multicultural society, and the people who are going to man those systems are constantly going to be facing the dilemma of how do they adjudicate between the people coming in and how they keep the country secure.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt if I may, just because I have 1.5 minutes left or something.
Okay.
The question was directly about the Auditor General's recommendations, because this is a study on security and with respect to immigration policy. So you don't have anything really to add to that. So I'm going to move on, if I may. So my second question is that individuals from countries all over the world have resettled here in Canada, like yourself and myself. New Canadians I believe, are an integral part to the prosperity of our country and our communities, and their contributions to success of communities like Scarborough, where I live and represent, are vast and wide-reaching. It's my belief that immigration is integral to our economy, both locally as well as our national economy, as well as the development of our communities. Would you agree to that?
Not necessarily.
Would you like to expand as to why not?
Well, I mean, the question is, again, how do we define our national interest? If you're talking about it, is it geared to economics, that immigration is necessary for the economic growth of it? Then what about when there are economic downturns, when there are serious economic problems? Are you, as a member and as and the Parliament, ready to also retrench the numbers?
Sorry, I know I have like 20 seconds. Statistics Canada actually says within the next 5 years or something, Canada is going to be dependent almost 100% on newer immigrants, on the labor shortages for the labor needs in this country. So are you saying that we should stop immigrants from coming into this country, and then we won't be able to fill the labor needs?
Well,
in this country?
You're giving me a 30-second answer to a question, you know. I mean, these are all full of falsification issues. All these studies can be contradicted by other studies, so you're making a selective issue of one particular study. I can cite you Grubel and Grady study.
Thank you. We have a number of speakers yet. Okay, so over to Deputy James.
Madam Chair.
I'm practicing my French today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also to our guest, Salim Mansur. I'm going to tie this. We've kind of gotten off track a little bit during this session, and I wanted to speak specifically to what Canada is doing, what we can do better to screen people coming into Canada. And I'm just going to give you an example of one particular case where I think that our current asylum system has failed Canadians. And when I first read about this particular case, I was outraged. I'm just going to read it to you. It has to do with a gentleman named Mahmoud Mohammed Isaiah Mohammed, who carried out terrorist acts with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Despite his connection to terrorism, he has been able to remain in Canada since 1987. And because of our current system, with the ability to seek judicial appeals on, I guess, deportations and so forth, he has actually cost Canadian taxpayers $3 million. Now, when I think about this case, I cannot think of a better example of how we, as a government, as a society, has failed the Canadian population, the Canadian taxpayers, and also really hindered the safety and security of our nation. So I just want to, we've got a little bit off track, but I'm just wondering what you can recommend to us, to the government, what we can do to correct the flaws in our current system for screening, how we can prevent this type of thing from happening again, how someone can be here since 1987 and still be fighting deportation.
Well, as a Canadian, I feel insulted. The people who have broken all sorts of laws are still, living off the taxpayer portion. I am a taxpayer, just as I'm a Canadian, so I feel insulted. And I think a majority of Canadians would feel the same way. The quick and the short answer is that once the legal process had been exalted, he should have been deported.
Thank you. So when it comes to screening, I know that you've probably heard that we're implementing biometrics and things. Would you agree that biometrics would certainly help in a case like this if there was a known record on this gentleman? Certainly, once he leaves Canada, he wouldn't be allowed to come back in with biometrics.
I would hope so, but I mean, the place of origin of this gentleman, they wouldn't have the technology to put it on the biometrics, and I think that is precisely the problem of what we're dealing with. The numbers, the source origin that have changed in terms of what was one time the pattern of immigration from Europe to now the pattern of immigration predominantly from the third world countries.
Thank you. With regards, because there's various different immigration streams for people who come into Canada, do you think one immigration stream over another poses more of a security threat? Do you see the ability for someone to come into Canada across the border through one immigration stream over another that would be leading to, a problem with security on a national level?
I do not fully understand what you mean by stream, but I mean the common sense tells us that there are sources of areas in the world, the source of origin, which are greatly problematic and does concern us in terms of the threat that they bring to Canada.
With regards to immigration stream, like I'm talking about coming here as an asylum claimant seeking refugee status versus someone who comes to Canada, gets permanent residency, and then applies for citizenship.
I agree with that, yes.
Okay. With regards to, and this is something that through the course of, I was just elected on May the 2nd of last year, so I've learned a whole lot of things about our immigration system that I didn't know actually occurred. I was a little bit taken back at times. And one of the things has to do with the entry and exit of people who come to Canada and our ability to track who's coming in the door and who's leaving the door. And and again, who's coming in the side door, who's coming in the back door when they should be coming in the front door. So I'm just wondering what your recommendations would be to improve our ability as a nation, as a government that's concerned about security, how we can better track people coming in and out of Canada.
What amazes me that any regular bank would track me down any part of the world if I had defaulted on their payments.
It's true.
And here it is, we as a country cannot track down and keep a track on people who are willing to exploit our system.
How much time do I have left?
15 seconds.
I'm going to be very quick. Now, you've talked a lot about the Muslim population and so forth, but do you feel that it ties into the ability to integrate easily into Canadian society? Do you think that that's leading to some of the problems? And I'm not singling out any one particular group, but I'm just wondering if that's the key to a successful person coming into Canada, really contributing, getting a job, and getting the most out of Canadian citizenship as well. Do you think easy integration is the key?
Madam, we are
Could you just hold
generalizing.
on for a second, please? Unfortunately, we've gone well over. It's 5 minutes and 15 seconds. So if Mr. Deputy Manigakis is next. So if he would accommodate and answer, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll ask my colleague to finish her thought, and then I'll continue on after her.
Thank you. I think it was just your answer there we were waiting for, whether you think easier or better integration in Canadian society quicker, having the language skills, et cetera, is that key to success?
Well, a very quick answer. We are generalizing. So, in terms of generalizing, yes, there's a huge problem of culture and history that we are dealing with when it comes to immigration from Muslim countries into adapting in a society like Canada.
Thank you. I won't take up any more of your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, and thank you for your testimony before us today and for being here. I think you answered the first couple of questions that I had. Is it fair to say that you are supportive of the ETA, the Electronic Travel Authorization, and biometrics? I think I heard you say that you thought that these technological tools, if you will, can assist us in identifying people before they come into the country. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Thank you. Canada welcomes a record number of immigrants every year. Last year, I believe we welcomed about 265,000. If I'm not mistaken, over the last 5-year period, we've averaged about 253,000 per year. A previous witness pointed out to this committee these high levels creates pressure to meet our targets. As a result, few immigrants are interviewed before obtaining visas to enter into Canada. We have heard testimony in the past that the lack of staff is not the problem, nor is the increasing the number of staff a solution. What do you recommend the government do to remedy this issue? Should Canada move towards more interviews as a method of screening applicants?
Well,
we have 1 minute, so letting you know.
We started.
Okay. No problem.
Well, we need more of it, and I understand that we are cutting back on our border security forces, So they're the problem of trying to match our economic resources to the needs. And simple economic 101, our needs are greater than what we can supply them with.
Yeah, well, since we're running out of time, I will tell you this, that when the RCMP and CBSA and CSIS officials spoke with us, when they were witnesses to this committee, they're highly supportive of these electronic tools, particularly biometrics, that they identify as a 21st century tool.
Yeah.
So I think that, in addition with interviewing process, gives the right tools to determine who the people are that are going to walk the streets beside our families.
I agree with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Salim, for coming to present to the committee.